Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Marla Manku from the Cavendish Group, and I'm joined today with Dr. Campbell, our clinical consultant psychologist. We're quite excited here today. We thank Caroline Stockman, the CEO, for inviting us to join your Balancing Risk annual conference for a very important group of people, the treasurers. And we can't underestimate the importance of their jobs today, given the pandemic and the change in environment. Today, we'd like to talk to you about adapting work patterns to support well-being and improve productivity. It's an important subject because we feel that with the pandemic, there have been so many changes to our day-to-day working, but also the integration of work within the home. And that allowed us to conduct a study very kindly with the Boston Consulting Group, who conducted a deep dive and illustrated that, in fact, there are unmet needs within the mental health workspace, and therefore allowing us to create a platform which is to be called Front Up, and is to help communities, the workforce, and important people like the treasurers to create a system that allows us to produce work effectively and, importantly, to support the economy going forward. I'd like to hand over to Tomás to talk about our findings in a little bit more detail, but also to expand on his great work in this space in helping build resilience and mental stamina.
Thank you, Marla. I think the results of the BCG group, the results that they generated were actually very much in line with the results from international studies looking at the impact of COVID and indeed previous pandemics on functioning, on daily functioning, on mental health, on family relationships. And I think, for example, recent studies that have come out of China looking at the psychological impact of the epidemic in Wuhan have demonstrated that a significant number of people have been very badly affected by both the fear of infection and the impact of lockdown and what that does to people's mental health, what it does to people's relationships. So the recent data emerging from China has shown that about 30-35% of people have become significantly and clinically depressed and anxious. And that's there are two effects. One is the effect of the living with the anxiety of not knowing what's happening, not knowing what to do, and the effects of being in lockdown, being in unfamiliar situations and cooped up with people that you're not normally cooped up with, even though these might be your family members and you love them, but the stresses and the strains and the pressures on those relationships often emerge in very negative ways and have a significant impact on family relationships, on people's mental health, and on their expectations of how life is going to be. All of our lives have been affected. Nobody has escaped the effects of COVID and lockdown. And I think this is possibly the starting point from which we move on to think about, well, what next?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, what we have discovered is that the challenge that there are on organizations that previously were well equipped and able to handle crisis situations such as Mind, and they really are now oversubscribed and overwhelmed, and really perhaps now we need to look at corporations to take responsibility and share responsibility with its workforce in providing additional support because of the additional demands being made on them. Would that be a fair reflection?
Absolutely, because I think Mind and other mental health charities are obviously experts at dealing with psychological problems that are obviously very, very well moderate to severe. But we're in a situation where probably everybody in the entire world has had some psychological response to COVID, ranging from impact on sleep to irritability to concerns and worries about the future and then to more serious mental health effects. But millions, if not billions, of people have found that they've put on weight because they've not exercised, that they've been drinking a little bit too much, or that they've resumed former habits like smoking that they've given up successfully. So I think that these are all indications that we've all been affected more or less, and that the mental health charities are probably absolutely unable to deal with the demand for services. But it's not just about mental health. I think it's about everybody adapting to a new scenario. And the problems are, of course, that nobody knows what's going to happen. So living with a sense of anxiety and a loss of control, because this is an invisible thing. We don't know where it is. We don't know who's got it. We don't know what personal risk we're at when we're in the community, in our shops, schools or workplace. So dealing with that anxiety is actually quite a big anxiety, because you don't know you don't know where this thing is. So that's one thing. But then from a workplace point of view, everybody is required to adapt in some way, in terms of perhaps working from home or going into the office less, and adaptation is, of course, an essential thing that we all have to do. We all have to adapt to novel and new situations throughout our lifetimes. But the interesting thing about COVID is that we're being asked to adapt in all domains of our lives very quickly. So we have to adapt our relationships, we have to adapt our social pattern and socializing pattern, we have to adapt our workplace. So we're asking an awful lot of people, we're asking a lot of people to do all of that adaptation at the same time. So I think often people become overwhelmed because it's too much all at the same time. And when people become overwhelmed, it has an impact on their ability to think, their ability to respond, their ability to be productive, because they are distressed. And the challenge facing us all is, how do we respond to that now?
Absolutely, and this particular user group, if we look at the treasurers, they have immense pressure on them. They have financial constraint pressures. They have to produce cash flows. They have to look at reserves. They have to think about how do they help their own organization, but also be a contributor to the economy and the survival of the economy, to build up the economy post-COVID and post-pandemic. But as suggestions have been made earlier, perhaps by Caroline as well, that, do we need to be more than this pandemic safe and pandemic secure as individuals, not just as organizations? And what can we do now to support this user group? And, we'd like to talk more and further about how we can come to your organizations and perhaps talk to the treasurers specifically on what our platform is and how it can be adapted to create a bespoke solution that particularly would help you, your teams, and the wider workforce.
Yes, I think that we're in a situation where adaptation is probably the only way to survive in business. We've all had to adapt to survive within our own homes and within our families. But I think for treasurers particularly, they're being assailed from all sides. There's that pressure to plan for the future, except nobody knows what it's going to look like. There's the pressure to make sure that people have jobs, but nobody can guarantee that anymore. And of course, each treasurer is an individual person as well, with their own family, their own pressures, their own caring responsibilities. So I imagine that many people feel they're being assaulted from every single side in a situation where they can't predict because nobody's been in this situation before. They can't plan because you don't know what you're planning for. And that's clearly a very, very difficult situation to be in. And there are no magic bullets to this, but there are ways of perhaps not adding to the distress. There are ways of being perhaps resilient, or as resilient as you can be, and maybe the only thing we can know at the moment is that everything will change, and we can't expect ourselves to be the way we were, because we're not in that situation anymore.
Absolutely. Yes, I think it's a valuable message that we ask our treasurers not just to look after the health of the business, but also to have some focus and think about their own well-being and their own health. Because in this storm, it sometimes, or I know in my case, I tend to put me last. And, it's a constant reminder that we have to try and ensure that we have the mental stamina to also be a contributor to our own lives, but the lives of our families and our colleagues.
And I think, that everybody's probably trying to do their best. But people, in fairly high powered jobs, as these people are, probably expect themselves to be very effective and very good at making decisions and very good at planning. But actually, we're in a situation where you don't know what you're planning for. So that may make people feel that they're incompetent, or that they're being challenged in lots of other ways, which may add to a sense of both responsibility and what do people who are good at their jobs do? They try to work even harder. But that might not be the right solution in this context, because what are you working harder for? We don't know what's going to happen.
Yes. Well, thank you. It's been lovely being here today. We look forward to welcoming you to our cubicle and see if we can continue to support you and come along and perhaps talk again and have another chat. It's about keeping the conversation going. Thank you, Tomás.
Thank you, Mal. It's a pleasure.